You unlock this benefit with the key of Patreon. Beyond is another dimension. A dimension of thought. A dimension of speculation. A dimension of mind. You're moving into a land of both waffle and substance. Of things and ideas. You've just crossed into the podcast zone. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Trekking Through the Twilight Zone. And we are going to be talking about long life. You know, what do you say? Like, as if you're sort of Gwyneth Paltrow, you'd be talking about nutrients, eating right and exercising, or in this case, alchemical science, and possibly the Philosopher's Stone. We are talking about Long Live Walter Jameson. Is it Jameson? Yeah. And this episode you described previous ones as a play. There's been a couple sort of recently I'd describe as like, you know, they're small stories. This has really only got three characters. It's got Walter Jameson, an elderly sort of professor called Sam, and his daughter, who's 30, who is due to marry Walter. And the reveal in this episode, as we get to it, is that Walter's age is indeterminate by others around him. And it turns out that actually he is an immortal who has been around for over 2,000 years. And we'll get into that in a moment. But so, yeah, Julian, what were your initial thoughts on this episode?
Yeah, I like this episode. I think it's a lesser episode, especially than the fantastic batch of episodes that precede it. But, you know, we've seen a lot of stories about immortals and immortality. And this is pretty good. You know, I especially like the sort of, you know, the sort of business of, you know, his colleagues, and that he tried to resign and, you know, was talked into staying and fell in love and, you know, tries to avoid it. But, you know, and this idea of sort of like, yeah, you know, you watch your relationships die. How many wives has this guy had?
Yes, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, one of the things I like about this is that they've made him very distinguished. It seemed to be important that, you know, for having lived 2,000 years, you know, he's very sort of like clean cut. He's very distinguished. He's sort of like, you know, debonair. You know, he looks sort of very late 50s, early 60s in that sort of, in a certain style. And so you know, when it's a reveal that he's been around for 2,000 years, it's an interesting double header for me, because I'm like, yeah, someone who's been around for 2,000 would become very adaptive. Like, they'd be like, this is the fashion. I've got to learn to blend in. I've got to learn new things. I've got to keep up with technology and all this other stuff. However, there's also a fact that, like, he sounds incredibly American for someone who lived around with Plato.
Yes, I mean, I found myself, I always do this when you watch a period piece, especially the older back you go. I look at his skin and I think, where are the blemishes? Where are the signs of like infection and lack of medicine? Nobody had movie star perfect skin, you know, in ancient times. It's just ridiculous. I mean, you know, Julius Caesar probably had, you know, just pox marks, and, you know, I mean, everybody had cuts and scrapes and stuff. So that's sort of, to me, I associate it with a kind of like Hollywood thing. I've actually done a lot of thinking about, you know, immortality, and I think maybe the reverse is true, that after a while you're just like, you know, look, these, you know, the iPhone is a fad, you know, MP3s, you know, like, look, I remember records. It's all going to be something else in 15 years. And for me, you know, you get older and you think like a decade is not what it used to be in our lives, right? So, you know, I think probably you get less adaptive as an immortal. But
maybe, but, you know, one of the things that I learned, you know, quite recently, I was feeling that, you know, you only have to go back sort of like 200 something years before talking to your ancestors becomes incredibly difficult, even within the same country, because the way language changes. And so, yeah, there's this thing of like, you know, speaking. If you were an immortal and you've been around for 2,000 years, I don't know, it sort of feels this idea of sort of like, you know,
you're still on the English thing. You're like American English.
No, it's not even that. But like I say, if he was great, but it's even the fact he's giving lectures
on history. I love that idea that he gives them because he felt like it was like he was there, and I love that as a conceit. I think that's absolutely fantastic, and it's totally what I would do if it was me. But like this idea of sort of like he can speak sort of like, you know, in a very modern cut debonair way, when I'm like, hang on, like, you know, we all pick up habits from different things, and you know, how long do they stick around and all this other stuff. So I don't know. I know it's only 22 minutes, but I'd love to explore that of like how he's had to change to be represented as a modern man. You know, if this is like, yeah, for years I was, you know, I had to change from ancient Greece to, you know, I moved with the times. So during the fall of the Roman Empire, I ended up living in, you know, Europe. I was trapped in Europe and had to survive through the plague and through this and through that. And then when it got crap, I moved to America, and I've been in America since the revolution and whatever. Like, you know, I wanted a bit of history to say, how is it you've ended up here? You know,
I mean, that's like an awesome movie. I mean,
yeah.
that's the Wim Wenders, you know, adaptation of Long Live Walter Jameson. But you know, as you say, it's 20 minutes. You know, it doesn't have time for this. But I mean, I love that too. I mean, you know, not to plug it, but you know, Lazarus. I have a Lazarus comic that explores some of this stuff. But I mean, I find myself thinking, you know, also about social mores. That I mean, if you grew up in the Roman world, you know, no matter how much you change with the times, you know, look at baby boomers today. You know, I mean, you're not going to keep up. You cannot just flip a switch and say, "Oh yeah, women should vote now." I mean, and if this made any sense, Walter Jameson would be like, you know, yeah, your daughter's nice, and just every couple sentences he mentions how she's property, you know, and he needs, you know, well, I'm negotiating with you because you know you own her until she's transferred to me.
Yeah.
You know, so that's another thing along with the language that, yeah, I mean, these are tropes.
Yeah, it's tropes. I mean, you know, I can't deny. I love the film Highlander, so you know, I can't, but I pick it up in that as well because that makes even less sense. But yeah, but the thing is, like, I like the fact this is a small story of, and what it boils down to is the fact that, like he says, yeah, we don't learn. We are basically animals, and we are driven by certain desires. I know I should leave. Like, I knew I should leave. I tried to leave. I was talked into staying, and now I don't want to leave. And I know exactly what's going to happen. And you are shown by the end of the episode exactly what would have happened. And so I like that it does show that he's actually, like you say, he is still human. And you know, makes bad decisions.
Yeah, I like that too. I did want to chime in on this college professor thing and the history professor thing, because I mean, you said you liked it, and I do too. I think that's like a clever idea, you know. That's sort of the first way you see him. On the other hand, the idea that like there's something about this that really, really bothers me. The idea that like if you live through the event, you understand the event better than the historian.
Yeah.
It's such a dumb idea. I hate this so much. I mean, it is true that people who live through an event, I mean, the events of our lives, we've lived through events that we understand the feeling around it in a way that historians are going to struggle to capture, and movies made 100 years from now will struggle to capture. Having said that, you know, just because you live through it doesn't mean that you understand the facts of it. And the idea that like everybody is just like, oh, entranced by his description of the Civil War is so ridiculous, you know, and it's so partisan that in real life people would say, you know, you are such a partisan and you get these facts wrong. That stuff is in dispute and you're asserting it as fact without citations. You know, you can't just write a history book and get an academic job if the history book has no academic citations. And it's like, well, trust me, this historical figure did this.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. I did ask the question because he appears to have just applied to become a professor and been granted, you know, that job. So yeah, I was interested in that. I was almost willing to give it that. In fact, I was probably more willing to give it that than his use of language, which I think says more about me, to be perfectly honest. But yeah,
Well, as an American, I just think everybody speaks like that, and it's a weird thing if they don't, right? Jesus
exactly. Yeah,
spoke American English. If you
yeah,
don't know,
and he looked very similar apparently.
that's true. Yeah.
One of the things I did think we talk about age and again, I don't want this to come across. I don't know how. Okay, she's 30 and he's 51. All right.
Hmm.
Now, I
Well,
know that
according, they think he's 51.
yeah, but even he says he's around 51. That's sort of
Yeah.
like the age at which he's pronouncing himself, and sort of like he's sort of got the graying at the temples, and he looks sort of like very Reed Richards, um, and so like but even to me, I'm like 30 to 51. And I know there are people that are age gaps, and people fall in love with who they fall in love with. I'm not trying to sort of be a prude around that, but I don't know. It just feels. I don't know. There's something about this that felt off, and maybe it's because you don't get enough background on the female in the cast. Like enough, but it just feels a little bit too. Like she's 30, but she's besotted with him. They still try and play her off like a girl. Do you know what I mean? And it's sort of they try and make out she's working for her PhD and she's going to be, great, and she's incredibly intelligent. Yet they still want to play her off as this sort of like lust-filled teenager, and it feels very confused.
I think you're right. I mean, and I think it's hard to talk about this without getting into sort of the current politics about age gaps and whatnot, and these days there are people who I mean look, the problem when somebody is a politician is having sex with underage girls is that's illegal, and those are underage girls. The problem isn't that they're in relationships with people who are 20 if they're 45, 50, whatever. These are consenting adults. There are power issues there. But I mean, sometimes we elide these things, and I'm not saying that's not something to look at or focus on, but it's not necessarily by itself a sort of condemnatory thing. And I mean, let's not forget, all of our societies 100 years ago, it was normal to have gaps, not 20 years, but books on marriage recommended 10-year gaps. So let's remember that. Having said that, I think because the father is a character, it comes off as really weird. And you're right that she's played like a little girl who's in love with him. You're absolutely dead on. And I just found the father so strange. That the father, Walter Jameson mentions the age gap, and it's like, oh, you disapprove because of that, right? It's clearly something on his mind. And maybe the point of that age gap is just to bring out the immortality thing, right? Because it's like, haha, the real age gap is about 2,000 years, guys. Which is clever on its own, but it does feel a little bit like, Professor Samuel Kittredge is sort of selling his daughter. It just feels bizarre.
They do talk several times about him giving his hand in, giving the hand in marriage. Like this old sort of like he came to see the father to talk about it, and I hate all that crap. Like, it always has bothered me, and it feels like very sort of, you say about property being given across. But even the way she's portrayed, like the actress is sort of like they make a point of saying she's 30. I'm like, all right, fine, that's a grown woman. She can make her own choices. How is it she's still living with her dad, and who says he's 71? But she gets sent to her room at one point. This is like, and she does the dishes. It's just this weird like. They're trying to sort of have their cake and eat it in this episode. It sort of it weirds me out. It doesn't work
because she's not important, right? I mean, she's the real plot is between those two, plus this ex-wife, at the end, who's very, very old, who just shows up and kills him, which I quite liked. Well, what did you think about the end of that?
No, I do. I kind of like this. There's a couple of things in the end that I kind of like. I mean, I do like this idea that she's tracked him down again. I like the fact she's tracked him down because of this announcement of the engagement, and she's a bit like, no, screw you, you know, you did this to me, you abandoned me, you know, when I was getting too old, and I'm not going to let that happen to someone again. So it's sort of like she's sort of taking revenge, but also trying to protect other people. I kind of liked it, and there's also a really good point he makes. There's a discussion about becoming an immortal, and because the professor's scared of dying. And Walter says to him, he says, well, it depends when you become an immortal. Like, I've looked like this for 2,000 years. Like, would you really want to become immortal at 71 with all your aches and all your pains, all your ailments? Like, you know, would you want to look like that for forever? And that's a really good point. And it made me think about Interview with a Vampire, when, you know, Kirsten Dunst plays it, and she gets, sired when she's a child and has to live forever looking like a prepubescent girl, and it's this idea then of being trapped in that body. So I like that idea. So that was really cool. But I also like the fact, and it made me think of sort of Last Crusade, Indiana Jones' Last Crusade. I love the fact she turns up to shoot him, and she uses the gun that he's been holding for just this occasion, like, you know. And it looks like a
possible suicide, right?
Yeah. And so he's thought about it repeatedly, but he said he acknowledges it. I'm a coward. I don't want to die. I did this to avoid death, and now I sort of want to die, but I don't want to bring it on myself. So I like the fact that gun is used in a sort of a Chekhov's gun kind of way. And so I like that. But I also like the fact he ages as well. He doesn't just die. Like, age catches up with him, and 2,000 years catches up with him. And again, it made me think of sort of the end of Indiana Jones and Last Crusade, when he drinks from the wrong cup. When it looks good. It looked pretty good. So no, I like the whole ending of this episode. It was really cool.
Yeah, I really like that he ages too, and I like that he. I'm not sure that I buy the, you know, cliche of like I want to die, you know, and I really don't buy that you have gone 2,000 years without any injury, you know. You haven't stubbed your toe, you know.
I don't go 2 weeks without an injury, you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. I mean, you know, it strains credulity. But you know, so I don't buy that. But I love that he ages, and I love the shot of him. It's sort of shot from underneath his chin as he's really old and dying, and he's sort of like gasps, and I thought, this is going on. This is pretty graphic for 1960s television.
Yeah, no, I thought it was done really well. I actually kind of liked it. I thought it was quite cool dispatching of him, and I like the fact she just disappears into the night as well. Like, you know, she escapes. The old woman just manages to sort of his ex-wife disappears into the night, so it is all sort of solved, unresolved and stuff. Like, he just disappears into dust. So I do really like all that. Yeah, no, it's a good solid episode on that front.
I feel that too. You know, it doesn't amount to a lot. It's not as charming as other episodes, but we, you know, with the cliche of immortals and stuff, this is a take worth doing.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a take. I think there's an interesting take on it. I mean, it raises questions around, are there others? Because it's clearly a science that's possible, and so, you know, it opens up ideas. But yeah, no, I thought it was a pretty good episode. But yeah, any final thoughts?
I'm good.
Excellent. Okay, well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you as always, and we shall catch you on the next episode.